On today's episode, we sit down with a longtime sports executive to talk about everything from esports to leadership and legacy to the Olympics to college athletics. From EngageMint, I'm David Millay, and this is Flip the Switch. Quick plug before we get to our guest introduction today. If you're focused on guest experience or employee experience, definitely go check out our email newsletter. As we work with pro teams and college athletic departments around the country, we're taking the lessons that we learn from our experiments and our projects, and we're putting those insights into the newsletter. A couple of times per week, you'll get everything from the articles and content that are inspiring us to innovate, as well as new tools that we're using and loving. If you get value from this show, you're going to love the newsletter. To sign up, head to engagementpartners.com/newsletter. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Flip the Switch, where we sit down with leaders in customer experience and employee experience, and we try to figure out what are the trends that they're paying attention to, what are the experiments that they're running, what are the principles that have driven success in their career. And then we try to take all those insights and we apply them to the world of sports and entertainment. More often than not, we have leaders that are in sports and entertainment on the show. Today's no different. We have Rick Burton today with us. Now, if you don't know Rick, Rick has been a longtime sports executive. So I'm going to go through some of his roles so you know his qualifications as we bounce around a ton of different topics in our conversation together. So Rick was the former commissioner of the National Basketball League in Australia. He was the former chief marketing officer for the U.S. Olympic Committee. He's a regular contributor to SBJ, Sports Business Journal, and Sportico. He's a professor of sports management and the faculty athletics representative at Syracuse University. He specializes in sports marketing, sponsorship, Olympic movement, professional league management, fantasy and video gaming, sport and literature, the NCAA. As a result, our conversation hits on all those different things. So it's a little bit of everything in our time together with Rick. One of the things I wanted to make sure to do, as Rick has spent a lot of time thinking and writing in the last few years, he's got 3 great books that I highly encourage you guys to check out. So the first one is probably the most relevant right now, based around NIL. The first one is 20 Secrets to Success for NCAA Student Athletes Who Won't Go Pro. They've revised it as a second edition to have a whole section on NIL. And I think that is just one more resource that athletic departments can use to help educate their student athletes as to how to build their brands and how to really have a successful 4 or 5 years in college as they engage as a student athlete. Another one of Rick's books is Sports Business Unplugged, Leadership Challenges from the World of Sports. And if you're a Syracuse fan, Forever Orange, the story of Syracuse University. We're going to link in the show notes to all of those books here. But I think as you'll see from this conversation with Rick, he's had so much experience in so many different areas that he's able to pull insights from those different areas and connect dots in other areas where leaders that just stay in one part of the sports and entertainment field can't connect on their own. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with my friend, Rick Burton. Rick, welcome to the show.
So great to be with you, David. Thanks for having me on.
I am excited to jump into a lot of this. I know we're going to get into tons of different stories from your long career in sports and entertainment. But why don't we start us off with something a little bit more progressive? You've gotten into teaching esports. And as we think about esports, it's really growing exponentially. And we're talking about targeting people that aren't traditional sports fans. So what should traditional stick and ball sports be learning from what you've seen in esports?
Well, I'm big on teaching, that we live in a digital economy. Everything is ones and zeros, and we're in a global economy. Everything is sold everywhere around the world, kind of all the time. And that last piece leads us to a 24/7, 365 economy. And that's a real easy concept for my students to grasp, which is, hey, I got to think about whether or not the product is something that can be transmitted digitally, is available worldwide, which it almost always is because of the internet? And then are we putting content up there really 24/7, 365? And I think that what you have with esports is a product that really lends itself to those three economies.
I love it. Well, we're going to get more into esports, but I think that's a great way to intro us into your background a little bit. You've had such a diverse background in sports and entertainment. Can you go through some of the highlights that stand out to you as you now are getting into the point of your career where you're thinking about legacy and you're thinking about impact? Talk us through some of your favorite roles in sports and entertainment that you've had, and I think that's going to give us a bunch of different jumping off points.
Well, you never want to think about legacy because that means you really have an ego, and we're all supposed to suppress that. I think you hope to hang in there. And in my case, it seems like I've been in the witness relocation program for the last 45 years. But listen, it's been a really fun ride, and I've had a very wonderful bride by my side the whole time who made it possible for me to jump around and move us. In a snapshot, I got to be a sports writer. I got to do sports public relations, brand management or marketing. I got to do sports marketing. Lucky enough to teach at a great university, the University of Oregon, go Ducks, and then run a small professional basketball league, go to one of the biggest sports movements in the world, the Olympics, with the U.S. Olympic Committee, and then come back to my alma mater, Syracuse University, and hang out a consulting shingle. Along the way, highlights, I got to work on the Miller Lite advertising campaign, the whole taste great, less filling. I got to see pro sports really up close from the commissioner's chair. I got to be involved with a really great Olympics, the 2008 Beijing Summer Games. And I've gotten a chance to pass on a few thoughts to a couple of generations of young sport management and sport marketing students who have gone out and eclipsed me easily with their careers.
Something that you said was interesting, though. I think you said something along the lines of, if you're thinking about legacy, it's about ego. I don't know. I feel like as a young guy, I'm thinking more about legacy already, though, where I'm thinking about what is the impact that I'm having on others. And what you just said, where you're teaching these kids and they've already eclipsed you and they're growing and they're having big impact. I would argue you are thinking about legacy and the impact that you're having on others and how you kind of want to be remembered, not because it's an ego-driven thing, but more because of, I think a good leader thinks about how can I impact the lives of others, and that ends up being a legacy. Go off that.
Yeah, I think that, there's I think some old dead Greek poet or, Greek historian said that, like 20 years after your death, no one will know that you ever existed. So I think, approaching things on, what am I doing so that people will remember me? I don't think that's likely at all. But I do think you can look at our industry. In my case, I've given 45 years to sports in different formats, different sectors, I guess, if you will. And so for me, that chance to give back to the sports industry, I came back to the U.S. from Australia, where I was running the basketball league, to give something back to my country. And I think teaching at the University of Oregon and Syracuse University has been a chance to give something back to future generations. I don't expect to be remembered for it, and I don't mean that to be a false humility, as much as I think that a lot of people are either motivated by money, which I'm not particularly, or fame, which I think is a useless energy spent, or power. And I'd like to believe I haven't been into any of those, although I think all of us, want to live a lifestyle that is comfortable, and all of us are aware of, our self-identity. Anyways, a lot of words to just say it's been a privilege really for me to be able to teach at a couple of places and maybe in that way give something back to someone else.
As you're teaching and as you're bestowing your wisdom, let's call it, on those around you, when you look back at your career, who were some of the people that made the biggest teaching impact on your career that inspired you to go out and be better?
I think David Stern always comes to mind first and foremost. I tell people he was my rabbi. I got a chance to work with David very early on in my career. He was either just about to become commissioner at the NBA or had just been named. And Miller Brewing Company was a big sponsor of the NBA. And I remembered very early on at the NBA All-Star game in the Meadowlands, I think it might have been 1983, being in a position to spend a little bit of time with David and just being so impressed that the guy at the top was that genuine. Jim Warsaw, who was the founder of the Warsaw Sports Marketing Center at the University of Oregon, was just such a giving man. He was fighting Parkinson's at the time. And, what I saw in him was this absolute desire to give to students. I've always been impressed with Phil Knight. I've written about him on a number of occasions. I've met Phil a number of times. He's been kind to me and gracious in our very brief interactions, but I'm fascinated by the thought of being a mediocre runner on the University of Oregon track team, but from there having a story that leads to building a $20 billion or $50 billion worldwide brand. These are pretty famous names that I've just been really blessed to connect with. And then, most recently, I'm the David B. Falk, professor of sport management at Syracuse University. And David and I have become really good friends over the years. And David has shown me so many things that I think were a part of what made him a great agent, a super agent in the basketball world. And I've been lucky enough to travel with him back to Australia and do a number of things with him. So those are the names that come to mind right away. I think what's unfortunate is I've just named a number of white men and not named people of color or named women. So I got to do a shout out for Val Ackerman, who's now the commissioner of the Big East, but was the head of the WNBA. Quinn Buckner, basketball legend, but he was someone that I got a chance to spend a lot of time with when I was in Milwaukee with Miller. Bob Lanier. There have been so many, and really, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, even from a distance, I don't know Michael. I've never hung out with him, but his daughter was one of my students, Jasmine, and I expect that Jasmine may soon run his franchise. And Michael came back to Syracuse to see Jasmine graduate, and you have to be impressed, if nothing else, with his absolute commitment to excellence and his achievements.
I love it. And so many good leaders. And I think as we all look back, right, we all know those leaders that impacted us positively or negatively, or we learned on, how we can do how we can do things better as our own leaders. As we think about leaders and coming out of this pandemic, and we think about what that new normal might look like. I mean, in your mind, the leaders that emerge out of this, what are they doing differently from the other leaders in sports and entertainment?
David, I think that's a fantastic question, and one that really doesn't get asked by anybody nearly enough. And that is, I think that you've got to be thinking about, I always use the Wayne Gretzky line, are you skating to where the puck is going to be? And it's overused as a cliche, but I think it just so encapsulates the position of, where the puck is now. How good are you at guessing where the puck is going to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? I had an executive at Miller one time that kind of made clear to me that you can think about your life as being one of climbing a mountain, and the higher up the mountain you go in terms of your title or your position, the farther out into the future you can see. And at the time he told the story to me, and I share this with my classes, I was kind of a junior assistant brand manager. I was probably on double secret probation at the time. And I couldn't really even see what I was going to have for lunch. It was something that, I wasn't very good at looking out into the future. You climb up through the ranks, you become a brand manager or a vice president of marketing, you become the CMO or the CEO, and all of a sudden what you're trying to do is you're trying to look out 5-10 years into the distance because you're higher up the mountain. You can see farther. And I think that the people who get skilled at being able to guess where things will be 5 years from now will do better because they just have that intuition. And I think that's a big part of why I've been pushing esports with my students, because it's easy enough to see how esports is exploding, betting, gambling, sports wagering, NFTs. There are a lot of things that I'm talking about in my class that I'm not fully informed about, But I'm able to say to my students, these are things you're going to have to get into. You're going to have to know about them, because if you don't, you're going to be behind the curve. Esports is really easy for me. It's competitive, it's global. And whether we're talking first person shooter or NBA 2K, these are dynamic properties. And you've seen it all over the world that big organizations are investing a lot because they understand the potential.
All right, now we're going to go down some different rabbit holes here. So the first question I want to ask, I want to get into esports and where you see esports really influencing different things, why you think it's so dynamic. But before that, I don't want to lose this question, and I'm scared if I don't ask it now, I'll lose it. When we think about leaders trying to figure out where the puck is going and skating to where the puck is going, how are you're obviously in a role right now as a professor where you're cultivating trends, you're trying to look at and see where that future is going, and you're hyper focused on that because you're teaching about that. I think a lot of leaders especially in sports and entertainment, get mired in the day-to-day and the reactionary world of their inbox and the things that they have in front of them, that they don't necessarily carve out as much time as probably should be dedicated to thinking about the business as opposed to working on the day-to-day business that's in front of them. So if I'm a rising leader, if I'm a director level or above, I mean, what kind of frameworks or methodologies do you use? Where do you explore these new trends? How do you figure out this is what's coming down the pipe and I need to be aware of it? I mean, mentally, how do you think about some of those things?
Well, I think you have to be a voracious reader. You've got to consume, from every possible source. And it's time consuming, and it's something that a lot of people don't like doing because the job itself it's not that it's tedious, it's demanding all the time. You're never off. I've actually started a new side business, which is executive coaching. And it's very interesting to me. My clients, the people who are coming to me as CEOs, are saying, I'm having trouble with X or Y, and trying to get them to minimize some of those daily things that you talked about and getting them thinking more about how is your industry, your sector, really being transformed? What did COVID do to it? What has the internet done to it? What is social media doing to it? And these things allow these executives to step back and actually ask, okay, am I thinking about it the right way? And what's hard for a lot of CEOs is it's lonely at the top. And in a lot of cases, a lot of us, everyone, has doubts. Am I doing the right things? Am I making the right decisions? Am I being overly defensive about a decision I've made as opposing to continuing to attack? The Gretzky thing, skating to where the puck is going, is about putting the puck in the net. And you have to attack to put the puck in the net. So, and we just finished a great Stanley Cup, by the way. And Tampa Bay is really a dynasty in the making. So
Really
when
are.
I'm talking to CEOs, I'm talking to them not about, it's not that I don't want to hear about their day-to-day problems, but I can't allow them to be consumed by that. They've got to delegate their anxiety. And that's a great line that I try to teach my students is learn to delegate when you have that capacity, that opportunity, and delegate the things that are really stressing you or sapping your energy so that you can remain focused on where this business or this product, this problem needs to go.
I have two questions in there, follow-up questions, and they're somewhat related on that. I mean, you talk about being a voracious reader and consuming a lot of different things that are out there. There's so much nonsense that is out there in the world. I mean, from your mind, how do you decipher this is the type of stuff I should be reading versus this is the type of stuff I should be ignoring or letting come to me at another time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not on social media, so I don't really spend any time on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, even though I need to talk about them in class. I tweet about once every 6 months, and it's usually something that's made me laugh, and I think it might make someone else laugh. I stick really to sports. There was a point in my career I was working for a sports and entertainment agency and started to dabble a little bit in music. And I really found that I couldn't do both. You couldn't have a foot in both camps. And so my thing has been sport. And so I'm reading things like Sports Business Journal. I've been a columnist for them since their first year. Actually a co-columnist right now with Norma O'Reilly, who's the dean at the University of Maine, dean of the business school. And Norm and I do a monthly column for Sports Business Journal. I read Sportico, and I have done a couple of individual columns for them. I keep an eye on Sport Business. There are a number of places out there, and we could start to go into Barstool Sports or The Athletic or any of the platforms that are really trying to capture what's going on in the sports business world. Can you be everything to everybody? No, not really. And I wouldn't be able to hold my ground if this was a heavy duty business discussion on the NFL or the NBA, because you can be narrowed down to just a league or just a team, or even in some cases, just a player, because the players themselves have become brands and they've become industries unto themselves. But as a generalist trying to teach that next generation of sport management students at Syracuse, I'm trying to make sure I've got at least a sense of what's going on and where the pulse is going.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think for me, as I'm trying to look at it, Twitter has become a good source for me of just information, because I think Twitter ends up being, for me, an area where people can put out half-baked thoughts.
Right.
And those tend to be the more fringe concepts that end up being mainstream 6 months later. So I think for me, it's been about, okay, how do I make sure I'm pruning that follow list to make sure I'm following relevant people that are on the cutting edge. And then I let some of the other mainstream articles, news, whatever, filter into me from different avenues. Yeah. I'm not outwardly seeking those things. And
I should have given, a shout out or props to Twitter and, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I think there are a lot of great places that are collecting the news, collecting the information that all of us, those of us in the sports industry, really need to draw from. But you're right, Twitter is a great place. And if you're following the right people, it's just there's hundreds, thousands of people you can be following. And so you become fairly avid skimmer. And you only, I talk in my classes about when I was a kid or growing up early in my business career. The way we were kind of taught to think about information and content was that we were scuba divers. We were deep divers on a particular topic. The students that I'm teaching these days are on jet skis, and they're not really going very deep. They're not going down 100 feet. They're kind of going, 6 inches down in the water and then bouncing to really the next setting. And so it has required of me that ability to shift, to be able to be nimble in everything that I do. And so what's hot today, and I'm doing a number of media interviews right now about the Olympics and the fact that, the Tokyo Games will not have any fans, and what does that mean? But tomorrow, the biggest news could be something that'll be tied to the NFL. And I think I've found that for me to be valuable, I need to be able to pivot and be nimble all the time.
Well, let's use that as a jumping off point. I know we want to talk about Tokyo Olympics here, and maybe that's a good place to jump into this. So it looks like we're not going to have fans in attendance here at the Tokyo Olympics. And being that this podcast is heavily focused on customer experience and fandom, employee experience, when we think about not having fans at the Olympics, but the fact that it's in Tokyo should be the most technologically advanced games that we've ever had. I think this ties back to what we were talking about a little bit with esports as well. I mean, how do you see these games going? I mean, what kind of impact on the sports world do we think that this Olympics in Tokyo is going to have? What are you predicting that we're going to see differently? Talk to us about some of those trends that you think we're going to see come out of Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is that we count on generally at the Olympics seeing world records broken or phenomenal, athletic performances, Olympic records, things like that. And without the crowd creating that charge, that electricity in the stadium, I'm curious as to whether or not we'll see record-breaking times. The athletes have been trained to actually, provide their best possible performance. But I think to eliminate the crowd, and unless they're going to pipe in some kind of, stadium noise, I think in some of these settings, it's going to feel a lot more sterile. And that's a shame for the athletes. Now, I think their whole thing is competition, and they will do everything they can to win their events. And so I don't think we'll see less competitiveness. We just may not see the kinds of records broken that we would have in the past. But then again, if Simone Biles is going to perform in gymnastics and you get a chance to see her do something live, I have to believe that people are going to tune in as they always have because the gymnastics is spectacular. The swimmers in the pool generally can't hear the crowd anyways, a little bit. Our daughter was a swimmer and their heads are underwater half the time. So I think we'll see, to come back to your question, I think we'll see a different kind of games, but the games have always been adaptable. The games have always kind of been there for us. Really, this is, if you think in the sports world, this goes back to 796 BC, and there was a long interruption before they were reintroduced in 1896. But they have survived almost everything that's gone on in the world for the last 150 years, 127, 20, whatever years it is. And so, we've had terrorism at the 72 games in Munich, and we had a bombing in Atlanta. We've had nations that have boycotted. We will get through these Tokyo games and they will thrill us because the athletes will be there. I think for me, one of the things I'm wondering about is whether or not there's still another shoe to drop. Could it possibly get worse in Tokyo? Could we have to shorten the number of days that the games will be held? Or could we possibly have to eliminate some events that are outside the Tokyo prefecture? I mean, could it be that, we just can't afford to have athletes going into places other than Tokyo? I'm making all of that up, but I'm really curious about the fact as to whether or not there's anything more still to happen in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I hope not. Obviously, I hope the games go off without a hitch, even though we it looks like we're not going to have fans. I guess my question on it too would be, do you feel like there's a sense that without having to do some of the live event production, I look at some of the sports and entertainment properties here stateside and what they did when they couldn't have fans in attendance, they still were paying staff. And so they said, okay, can we look at this staff and reposition them and start to do some more digital type engagements? Do you think we see Tokyo start to lean in on creating some more of those digitally participative experiences around the games that we've maybe never seen before? And if so, what might some of those things be?
Yeah, I could be really wrong on this, but I don't. I think their whole focus and all of their energy, and I was involved with Beijing. It is just so hard to put on the games the way they're intended to be put on, and they're facing challenges that no one's ever dealt with. So I'll be surprised if they had the bandwidth to be able to try and experiment in some of the other places that you've just mentioned. I think right now they're holding on for dear life and doing everything they can to just get these games held. And it's going to be so hard to have opening ceremonies. It just will not be the same parade of nations in terms of long crowds of athletes kind of coming through and waving, and it'll happen, but just what a challenge. And you've got to, full respect to the Tokyo Organizing Committee. I think they're doing everything possible to uphold their commitment to the IOC.
Oh, makes sense. Well, let's pivot here. Let's go a little bit into your role right now with Syracuse Athletics, where you're the faculty athletics representative. You are the first faculty athletics representative we've had on this show, and it's always been a role that's a little weird to me, maybe because I just don't understand it exactly. So maybe give us our listeners. I'm going to say that. Give our listeners a 30-second breakdown of what it entails, because I know exactly what it is.
Right. Well, the NCAA is an association of universities, and universities are in the business of educating young people, generally between the ages of 17 and 22. And every student athlete who participates in NCAA athletics does so as a student first. Now, a lot of people doubt that, and there's some cynicism that there are people playing football or basketball as a stepping stone to get to the NBA or the NFL. And we acknowledge that. But first and foremost, the majority of NCAA student athletes are at their institution to get a degree. And I think to actually learn something that prepares them for life after college, a career, a trade, a skill set that is going to allow them to go forward and make the world a better place. that sounds ideal or it sounds naive on my part. But what the NCAA has instituted is that every university will have a faculty athletic representative, an FAR, who's really involved with looking at the marriage of academics and athletics to make sure that we maintain that focus on academics and that we understand that these are students, not professional athletes. The cynics in the audience, people listening to this, will say, "Yeah, but people who are one and done in basketball, I've heard that student athletes don't go to class." The myth and the way that the media a lot of times portrays the NCAA and the member institutions and the student athletes, I don't think is really accurate to what generally goes on with almost 98% of all student athletes and the experience that they have. And I know firsthand from working with football and basketball players that they understand that they are one ACL away from not being able to play sport professionally, and you want to give them everything you can to prepare them for life after sport. And I'm actually a co-author on a new book. The second edition just came out this week called 20 Secrets to Success for NCAA Student Athletes.
Got a link to that, Katie.
Yeah.
Link to that in the show notes.
And I think that, that book looks at talking to high school seniors and saying, what can you expect as you become an NCAA student athlete? And then what can you do in your freshman year, your sophomore, junior, senior, even in grad school to optimize your likelihood for lifelong success? And it doesn't take away from your desire to play professionally. That's great. Everybody would want that for you. But at the end of the day, you will cease to be an athlete at some point in your life. And the percentage of people that will make so much money as a professional athlete that they never have to work again is infinitesimally small.
So your role, though, as the FAR is really kind of to make sure that academics is continuing to be front of mind in the athletic department. Is that kind of what I heard?
It's a part. I mean, I report directly to Chancellor Severud at Syracuse, who's got a great commitment to athletics, but also to the academic mission of the university. And I work very closely with John Wildhack, the athletic director, and his entire staff. These things have to work in conjunction with one another. They have to be something that you can't take the academics out of the discussion. And you have to recognize that sport is a lot of times the front porch for major universities. Duke is a great university, but I think probably more people are familiar with Duke basketball and Coach Krzyzewski than they are with their social work program, or with their science departments. So what we have to understand is that sport over the last 100 years has really served these institutions really well, but make sure that we're, and again, I try not to appear naive in this or too idealistic, but recognize that the academic mission is why those universities exist.
How do you see, I mean, you've been in this role since 2014, is that right? I mean,
That's correct.
How have you seen this role evolve in the last 7 years? What have been some of the biggest changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's way too easy to point immediately to name, image, and likeness, which is about to make 500,000 student athletes into entrepreneurs. And at some level, that's really great. We're about to have a chance here at Syracuse to teach student athletes how to think about themselves as a brand or as a business, and get to talk to them about things like, if you make money, you're going to have to pay taxes. If you stage a clinic, you may have liability things that you have to think about. If you're staging this clinic by yourself and someone gets hurt during your clinic, there are lots of parents out there that will be willing to sue you because they're going to think you're a famous athlete making lots of money. We've got to talk to people about, okay, how do you use social media and how quickly can you make a mistake if you do something the wrong way that suddenly causes everyone to say you're toxic and suddenly you can't make any money with your name, image, and likeness. For a lot of these kids, these are concepts that they've never had to think about. Another change that's really been very recent is the transfer portal. And for basketball and football players, it's been there for baseball and hockey. This concept of you have a one-time transfer opportunity Well, that's great, but a lot of them don't realize that if you transfer, more than likely you're going to go backwards on credits. So you're transferring to another school to get more playing time because you still believe that you can play in the NBA. Probably a very flawed decision because you weren't getting playing time at the school you were at. And now all of a sudden,
Right.
instead of having 80 credits towards graduation, you only have 60 because your new institution doesn't accept all the credits that you'd earned. And now your ability to get your degree has been pushed backward. Now you may need a fifth or sixth year, and now you may be more likely to drop out. But it was really exciting when everybody was telling you should transfer. If you go to this school, you'll play more minutes and you'll be the star of that team. Maybe, maybe not.
Between transfer portal and NIL, it creates this really weird dynamic, I think, in college athletics where I'm optimistic in certain ways and I'm pessimistic in other ways. I do think my kind of hot take that I've shared with Katie and our team is I do think that we are probably going to see athletic departments evolve a little bit to look somewhat more like a record label and an artist relationship than the traditional method that we've had for college athletics, which is really about growing and nurturing young men and women and helping shape them to make an impact in our society, in our community post-college. I do feel like now, because I think coaches drive so much of the conversation behind scenes of what actually gets implemented in athletics, that I think coaches are going to say, hey, we got transfer portal coming. I really got to focus maintaining these relationships all 4 years. It's not like once kids come to school here, they're stuck here for 4 years. They can go on a whim, and we've constantly now got to be focused on helping them build their brand. So now my fear is that kids are going to be going to schools based on what athletic department has the best marketing engine. And I'm going to go to school based on the one that I think can help me grow my brand the biggest. Again, not saying that hasn't been some of the case in some of the bigger revenue generating sports over the last couple of years, but that's my fear now that it's going to happen with tennis and soccer and all the other Olympic non-revenue generating sports as well.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I think that a lot of the field hockey players and cross-country runners and rowers and things like that may not see too much of a difference. There will be something for them to play with. But the discussion anytime we're really talking about the NCAA in college sports seems to be basketball and football. And they generate the most media coverage and the most excitement, it appears. And so I think that there will be some real challenges for the coaches as to what kind of a relationship do you need to have with your student athletes. And you're going to have to probably be aware of the fact that this is a brand new world. And those that are nimble, those that understand how it works will probably be more proactive with their athletes and structuring their practice times and understanding that these students are being told, hey, there's a chance that because you play for, and then you fill in the name of the school, Michigan State, UCLA, you can now do these extra things. Well, 40 hours a week was supposed to, the old rule in the NCAA was like 20-26, which was 20 hours of school, 20 hours of athletics, and 6 hours of sleep. And really, I think, what some people actually believe it could become is 10 hours of school, 50 hours of things tied to your sport, and 4 hours of sleep. And these student athletes are going to have a lot of challenges as they try to balance a life that we used to protect them from certain things, and people complained and criticized the NCAA for keeping these student athletes from having rights that they felt every other student had. Well, we'll see now how this plays out. I think some of the student athletes will get it great. It'll go really well. But I think there will be some student athletes who may get hurt by the NIL process. And I don't wish that for them. We've got to be there to try and help them. But a lot of that, let's go back to my book, These 20 Secrets to Success. And we wrote a new NIL chapter for the book, for the second edition, which is to say, hey, but be also aware of these challenges as you go to try and make this money that everyone in your posse is telling you you're entitled to.
When we think about being nimble and as an athletic department, as senior leaders, as administrators, trying to navigate these changes, and for you, having been in the pro space as a commissioner working with the Olympics, what's a traditional mindset that you see in college athletics? Not saying it's at Syracuse in particular, but what's a traditional mindset that you've seen in college athletics that you think has to go in order for college athletics to really thrive as an industry in this new world?
Well, I think we're entering a time of reformation, and I'm not an expert in any way on how reform happens or how it changes an organization, but I think the NCAA right now is going to have to pivot with the differences, the things that have come out of the Supreme Court decision, that are going to come out of legislation that was created by state governments towards NIL, towards NCAA legislation like the transfer portal. They're going to have to understand that it is probably going to require a different business model. And I'm kind of flying this now at 20,000 feet rather than down at the ground level, and saying that how we understand athletic departments and their operating budgets and their purpose may be something that's going to require review. And I think the best of the schools are really going to address that. When you and I are talking about this, we're really talking about the Power Five in almost every case, the five big conferences. We tend not to be talking about the mid-majors. We tend not to be talking about the small conferences where sport is still an enjoyed thing and the crowd sizes are 500 people, where the coaches are not making millions and the players are not on scholarship. I mean, at a lot of schools, you can play sports if you want to, but we're not giving you a scholarship for it. And then at the biggest institutions, there's a trade-off. And one of the discussions that I think often gets overlooked, and maybe, David, this kind of comes to your question, is this thought of that somehow the universities weren't doing enough for the student athletes. If you're going to Stanford or you're going to Duke, and the cost of tuition and room and board and all the clothing and all the meal money that's given to you, that's probably a $75,000 value year in, year out, if not more. So let's take that 75 times 4. That's 300,000 that someone is getting kind of guaranteed from Stanford, Duke, Northwestern, Syracuse. 300,000, and there's a lot of people saying that 300,000 is not enough. Now, what'll be interesting?
I'm not in that camp.
Yeah, what will be interesting is when someone says, "Well, I think I can do better somewhere else," and they find out that they sacrificed 300,000 to chase something else, and it wasn't there. This issue is driven a lot by, I think, a handful of players who rightly could make a lot more money. So Zion Williamson is a great case. What would Zion have been worth, or Trevor Lawrence, on the open market? But where the individual maybe lost a little for the good of the many, we're now about to find out whether a lot of people are going to possibly misplay the opportunity that's been provided to them with name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal.
My last thoughts on NIL is, I mean, back to what you mentioned about the smaller schools. I actually think it'll be probably more beneficial for some of the smaller schools and your more mid majors or your D2, D3, where as a men's soccer player, I can now get a summer job and get paid, right? I can get taken out to dinner by my uncles or my roommate's parents, right? And not have those restrictions.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm not going to run into the sponsorship aspect of things maybe, but I think it opens up some of those doors that might have been definitely inconveniences before.
Yeah.
Well, let's move a little bit here. I want to come back to esports and some of the trends that you're looking at right now as we think about the future. So we just saw, I don't know if you saw this, I think it was this week, with the NHL hiring Josh Richards and now YouTube influencers to tap into kind of understanding the voice of the fans and moving forward. We think about being agile and understanding where the puck is going. I think the NHL is trying to do that with that move. I mean, what are some of the methods that you're seeing of teams really try to break from the traditional sports fan and engage with a new set of fans?
Yeah, well, I just wrote an article about this for Sport Business, and it was, more or less why I'm teaching esports. And I started the article talking about the Baltimore Ravens had just announced that they were creating an esports league. And having worked previously with the NFL really closely for a number of years, that doesn't sound like the old NFL where the league itself has always been so controlling, was allowing one of its member clubs, the Ravens, to actually start to play around in this space and to play with esport games that were not Madden. In other words, that weren't NFL content. And it meant that there was a diversification. And that's an interesting, one of the things I try to teach with is, you're thinking about market expansion or diversification, these kinds of concepts where you're trying to grow your business. It's really a growth strategies chart. And you get more people to try your product. You go into new markets, you establish new brands, you diversify. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that by these leagues and even by their teams as they understand that there's incremental revenue there. The challenge is whether or not you can keep everybody strategically aligned and whether or not you wander too far afield. The NFL played around with skins in Fortnite. And you've got listeners who don't know what Fortnite is, and they would be surprised to find out that, little icons were able to wear a Minnesota Vikings skin in a game that appears to be kind of a shooter, wizards, and it's kind of like, what? Why would someone wear a Minnesota Vikings skin inside a battle game? And now we have to be able to explain that to them, that this is where a lot of these things are going. I use a lot in my class the movie and the book Ready Player One. Ernest Cline's book that Steven Spielberg turned into a movie. And what a lot of people forget is that movie, the book as well, was set in Columbus, Ohio in like 2044, might have been 2045, talking about an era that is only 20 years from now. And it assumed that virtual reality and augmented reality and things like Oculus Rift had gotten to a point of development that people were looking to go inside completely, mythical is really the wrong word, virtual worlds. And that they wanted to escape the reality of what was going on in what we'll call the real world, air quotes around it, and go into a completely different universe. And when the book came out, it would have been considered science fiction. As I sit here today, I know that there are esport players going into those worlds and staying in there, with Halo or Dota, Defense of the Ancients, or going in there with Madden or 2K. And these are exciting places for them, and they have friends all over the world that join them, and they meet there, and they talk to each other on Twitch. And here I am talking about Twitch on this podcast, and some of the listeners may be like, isn't that kind of like Twitter? And you have to explain, no, Twitch is a completely different animal, which I won't get into here. But I think, if you talk about the NHL, they're looking at the success that the NBA has had with 2K. And in some ways, 2K came out of nowhere, didn't, but for the sake of this story, it came out of nowhere and became almost instantly overnight bigger than the G League and the WNBA. And I think the NHL has got to be saying to itself, what can we do with electronic arts, EA Sports, to be able to actually welcome in this audience that maybe we haven't been talking to fully enough?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode on this. We probably will here coming up. But I think once you start exploring some of those worlds, you start to see the stuff that's happening right now and actually has been going on for the last couple of years, just in smaller niches. I mean, one website that has been fascinating me for like the last 6 months is called Replica.ai. That's Replika. And you start to see that, and it's basically a digital AI best friend for you. And when you start to realize, okay, what is their average monthly users on that site? And it's not like there's a small amount. There's hundreds of thousands of people using that site every single day. And you start to think about that, and you're like, okay, there's a world happening that is very outside of our traditional, how we know live events and sports, that people are engaging with on a regular basis, and they're spending their time and their share of their attention. They're spending their share of wallet. They're buying those skins on Fortnite. They're buying and spending time in these digital worlds, more or less, these digital ecosystems. And so I think what the Ravens are doing is really interesting because they're tapping into that space as opposed to ignoring it and saying, nope, people are always going to fill our venues and that's how we're going to make money. They're understanding that that attention and that money is shifting to another platform, and they're saying, how can we take our brand and move it into that platform? So I think it's smart.
You're right on the money. And the great Katie Rudy, who had a class with me, may have had me play for her, the movie Her, or the trailer, because it probably would have been illegal for me to show the whole movie. And that's, I think, the Joaquin Phoenix movie, where his interface is Scarlett Johansson, and she's the voice that talks to him every day, the AI that you just talked about. And these interfaces are going to get a lot more personalized, and they're going to be a lot more predictive. And AI is a great topic for you to do an entire podcast on, because we're really, if you talk about Moore's Law, really all things computer are going to continue to double, I think, just about every 2 years. And so what you think is cutting edge today in 2021 will be ancient history really by 2025. 4 years from now, which is only two Moore's Law jumps, two iterations forward, is going to just change how we understand what AI and virtual reality, augmented reality can do for us. You guys will remember the fact that
Rick, real quick, I was going to say for the listeners, Moore's Law, that's MOHR, if you want to look it up to understand what Rick's saying. But go ahead, keep going.
No, you would have remembered that a couple of summers ago, the craze that ran through America was Pokemon. And everyone was running around with their phone doing augmented reality with Pokemon. Now, it was a flash in the pan, but that will come back because someone is actually working now on creating that immersive world. Is immersive the right word? It's not invasive, but it's a world that I can enter.
Immersive.
Yeah,
there it is.
Immersive. That's the word I wanted. So anyways, yeah. So I agree with you. And I would say that the opportunity to work in artificial intelligence is going to be one that I think treats a lot of students really well.
Agreed. And I think for all these sports brands, you brought up something that was interesting where you said, hey, is NIL and some of these changes that we're seeing going to make sports organizations and athletic departments redefine what their purpose is truly? And I do think some of that might have to change. And normally I'm a proponent of, like, your purpose should always stay the same, right? Coming from Disney, where Walt set that purpose around, especially for the theme parks at least, around creating happiness for people of all ages. That has never changed and will never change. But it's so broad that they can do a bunch of different things with it. It's more about creating a purpose around emotion and the emotion you're trying to elicit from your customers and the people that you serve, as opposed to tying your purpose to here's what our business mission is, because that should evolve over time as new things come into place. So I don't know. It's all. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I think your analog is perfect, that Disney and the happiest place on earth is a great, if not mission statement. It's a great way of kind of understanding this and looking for the parallel that says, okay, what does sport have to give you that is so easily understood? When I say Disneyland, you go happy, right? And when I say sport, or I go the New York Yankees, what am I going to be getting? And increasingly, I'm not sure that it's going to be the in-stadium experience. I think it's going to be a blend of in-stadium and what I'm calling, borrowing a word from someone else, the glocalization, which is how do I globally actually feel like I'm locally involved?
Okay, so this is interesting too. I don't know where this is going to go. We might end up cutting this part, right? But I think when we think about the purpose of an athletic department specifically, obviously with your role, so many of the mission statements, if you will, are about serving the student athletes. And I think for the average person that's out there today, when they think about Disney, they think happiness. When they think about college sports, I don't know that they think about student athletes and academics in today's world in 2021. And it's a shame, but I think that's, for better, for worse, whoever's to blame, doesn't matter. But I think that's where we are right now.
Well, John Wildhack here at Syracuse University has put a mission statement in front of all of us, everyone who works in the athletic department and all the students, which is to transform our students into leaders. and that their athletic experience will be one about developing their leadership capacity. And I've synthesized it down, but I think that that's very much what's going on at Syracuse, at least. And I think that all of the NCAA institutions are going to have to be asking that question. What do we want you to get out of your time at Syracuse and your experience as a student athlete?
Yeah, and even that one, I like it because it is a little bit more broad, right? It lets you say, okay, yeah, what does being a leader truly mean, right? And there's a number of ways to actually attack that. So, all right, well, Rick, as we start to wrap up here, I mean, if you've got a billboard and you could kind of put it out there and put any saying on it, any phrase, a tweet maybe, you want to keep it under 140 characters, 280 characters, advice that you would give to other senior leaders in sports and entertainment?
Yeah, I worked at Miller Brewing Company at the very beginning of my career, and we had a vice president there named Al Easton. I lost touch with him, and I expect he's probably passed on because this would have been 40 years ago. But I went to him one time, and I asked him what his definition of success was. And he gave me really a 180 character answer that for years I wrote down on my blotter. When I sat at my desk in my cubicle, or when I finally moved into an office, I wrote it down every month when I tear the calendar page off. And his definition of success was learn and then do those things you are not presently skilled at doing. And to me, that suggested a willingness to be a lifelong learner and to constantly be learning new things, that those new abilities, those new traits would make you successful. Learn and then do those things you are not presently skilled at doing. So for me, I mean, things that I'm thinking about as I imagine retirement, which could be maybe 10 years away, but I'd love to learn a second language. I'd love to learn to play the bass guitar. I'd love to learn some new things that up to this point in my life I wasn't able to do. I've always imagined, rebuilding a 1941 Willys gasser. And I'm not a car guy, and I'm not particularly handy. But I think that I would like to learn and then do some things that I wasn't skilled at doing and see if I could master a few new things. And, Mrs. Burton doesn't think that's a great idea for me to fill up our garage with a broken down car. And there's no need for me to drive around in a 1941 Willys gasser, in Syracuse, New York. But that's kind of like the kinds of things that I think people have to allow themselves to imagine. And while I'm teaching an esports class, it wouldn't hurt for me to get in and become decent at League of Legends, or at NBA 2K. So that the next time you and I are together, I could school you, right?
I know.
Right? I would be willing to back up the bus and take you to school in 2K, so.
There it is. Yeah. Next time you come on, we're not only going to put your Twitter handle and your LinkedIn, we're going to be putting your Xbox gamer tag as well right next to that, so people can link in and play with you.
Keep pushing my books. Make sure that Katie has got all my book titles up there, with the cover right behind me. Can
we get all those on Amazon?
Yeah, you can.
Where's the best spot for us to get it?
Amazon's got all the books. The one behind me is Forever Orange, which is 150-year story of Syracuse University, and Katie Rudy should have a copy of that, and I'm sure your organization would like to buy her one.
Sounds like a great idea, Rick. And anybody listening, we'll put links to all of Rick's books in the show notes, and that way you can get easy access, click on it, buy it, support Rick, and Rick, I think that's a great way to end it. Awesome having you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
It's great being with you guys, and just keep doing it. I mean, I think we all need these things while we're driving home. Have interesting guests. I'm not sure that I've delivered on that, but just having people talk, just the social interaction, being able to exchange ideas is so valuable. So thank you guys so much.
Appreciate the time, Rick. We'll talk soon. Today's episode is brought to you by Checked In, a new tool in your operations toolkit that helps you understand exactly who's working in your venue. It's one of the tech products the EngageMint team helped create during the pandemic, and with it, we set out to solve some of the key problems sports and entertainment operators face every day. The tool does a few things, from helping you gain more labor data to operate more efficiently and mitigate risk, And it also saves you time and headaches by automating the horrible check-in and credential approval process that has existed for so long. But my favorite part of Checked In, hands down, is that it's tied to a digital learning platform. Now, historically, training game day staff has taken place before the beginning of a season. But how do you train the workers that start mid-season, or the workers that just come in to work the big games, the big events? Well, this tool solves that issue. With Checked In, you can create and push training to your teammates digitally, and you can require employees to watch training videos before they're able to physically check in to work. Checked In has begun rolling out at some of the biggest stadiums in the country, and they're now opening up beta access on a limited basis. If you want to see how it works and get a demo, head to checkedin.app. That's CHECKDIN.app. We'll make it easy and link to it in the show notes. Hey guys, before you head out, just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That helps more of your peers find the show as they search for ways to get better in their own roles. But this podcast is just a small part of what we do at EngageMint. In our normal day in the office, we're crazy focused on helping athletic departments and sports and entertainment companies generate more revenue by becoming more customer-centric. To see how we might be able to help your organization, visit EngageMintPartners.com to learn more. Download a free guide, check out our blogs and case studies, or schedule a call with us if you want to see how we can help with your particular objectives. Our goal is to help you create deeper connections with fans and generate more revenue. So when you're with us, hopefully you find a nugget or two that helps your cause.